99. I'm Brianna Gray, and I'm joined by a familiar cast of characters and somebody new. We all know Josh from previous streams.
How's it going? Good to be back.
And now today we're joined by Chief of Staff Ari, who
I was told on Twitch I really want to play Excite Bike. That's my game of choice. By the way, you don't know what Excite Bike is?
You're the
oh my
most online
god!
of us
It's
all,
the
I think.
greatest Nintendo game in history. It's this bike. It's like a motorcycle racing game where you design these courses and jump over things. It's amazing. It's my favorite video game, other than NHL PA Hockey 94. 1994 specifically.
You know, this show's all about how the corporate media doesn't talk about the issues that matter, and they also don't talk about the video games that matter.
Nobody talks about NHL PA Hockey 94 anymore. It's a great game.
It might surprise you to learn that the topic of the show is not actually 1990s era video games, but in fact, media bias. Which is why I'm really glad to be joined today by you, Ari, because you are someone who actually has had a career before your career in politics in the media, so you are a professional of sorts.
Some would say.
You've written a book.
I've written several.
Go ahead. You should plug your book, Ari.
I wrote a book on Fox called The Fox Effect.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a book generally on how lies get created in the media ecosystem called Lies Incorporated.
Okay. So some people might be thinking then, you bring up Fox.
Yes.
How is this not just a conversation about, fake news? How is this not us just sitting here the way that Donald Trump has done and trying to impugn all of the news sources that just happen not to go our way? All of these stories that happen not to be flattering to the candidate that we support. What is different about the analysis that we're about to do today?
Well, first, I think there's an ultimate respect for the institution of the media, right? That the media is a incredibly important institution in our democracy, and without a functioning media, democracy will fall apart. And when I look at the media, I don't want every story about Bernie Sanders to be perfect and glowing. I mean, I guess that would make our jobs easier, but it also wouldn't be appropriate. Like, a skeptical, questioning media is important.
Yeah.
The question is when you move from a skeptical, questioning media to a media that is clearly letting biases and other things show in their reporting and their coverage. And look, I think the president clearly hates a free media. And has edged on the call for violence against media, and that's way over the line, and we don't want that. But media critique, by the way, is an important part of democracy. An important part of media is saying, you know what, that wasn't right. That's imperfect. Let's strive to do better. I view media critique as an ultimate way of checking the media and saying, hey, let's do your jobs better. It's the ultimate respect. Because there are good and bad people in every profession, and certainly we all make mistakes. Hell, I make like 6 a day.
That's pretty good.
Every day. And,
only 6, sorry.
Okay, like 10? But the point is, media plays an incredibly important role in our democracy, and therefore them getting it right is incredibly important.
Yeah. So where should we start? Like, where should we start with the question of why is it? It seems that there does seem to be a media bias against Bernie Sanders as a candidate in particular.
And it's bigger than Bernie too, right? It is a bias against some of the most important issues facing this country and facing working people.
Right. And I think we have an institutional bias that we've seen somewhat this week. There was Bernie tweeted, and he said, he was tweeting in response to something that happened on a media show where somebody said, I want Bernie not to give the same speech anymore. And Bernie, I'm paraphrasing here, Bernie tweeted out, well, I'll stop giving the same speech when we've reached full justice.
Right.
Then I'll write some new speeches. And that's the point. There is an institutional bias in the media for something new, for something exciting, for something salacious. And Bernie Sanders' continual history of standing up on these issues over 40 years is not new and exciting for people. So there's a tendency to say, oh, Bernie Sanders talking about how people don't have health care. That's boring. My viewers don't cover it. But it becomes a cycle of those issues not getting covered at all on TV.
Yeah.
And that becomes the problem.
Right.
So in some ways, top level issue is that the media favors the salacious over the substantive.
The salacious over there's one of the great analyses of the media came from Roger Ailes, of all people. And it's one of my favorites. Actually, you have the book behind. It's in the book behind me, The Fox Effect. After we can pull it off the shelf. No, let's not do that. in the book, he'd run.
I open right to it. I feel like
no, it's Roger Ailes all over that book.
Gotcha.
He ran George H.W. Bush's campaign in '88, and after the campaigns are over, they always have these forums at Harvard. Harvard brings all the people together, and they do this whole like media show at Harvard. And Roger Ailes was at Harvard, and he was being interviewed by Judy Woodruff, and Judy Woodruff was asking him about how you get attention in the media, and Roger Ailes said, well, if you have two candidates, one who presents a comprehensive case to make peace in the Middle East, and one who falls off the stage into the orchestra pit, who gets on the evening news that night?
Yeah.
And it's the person who falls off the stage into the orchestra pit gets on the news that night. And his point, and Judy Woodruff was like, so you're saying candidates shouldn't talk about issues? Are you saying candidates talking about issues is a bad thing? And Roger Ailes responded, suicide. And look, I think in many ways our campaign fights that. The reason I want to be here is because, and I think the reason most of our staff is here is because we deeply care about issues. Yeah. We deeply care about Medicare for all. We deeply care about college for all. We deeply care about student debt forgiveness. It is those issues are what's personal to us on this campaign. That winning Medicare for all is a personal fight for, I think, almost every single person who works for the campaign. Yeah. And that's not what the media wants. And by the way, this was the trick that Donald Trump, who had a very strong relationship with Roger Ailes, pulled off, right? The reason media covered every single speech he gave in 2016 was because they were waiting for him to fall off the stage into the orchestra pit. And he'd do that by saying crazy things, but it meant people would cover his whole speech. And the Donald Trump thing also shows another bias. And look, the media in this country, and this is just a factual statement, the elite media, the media that's at the top, the cable nets, the lead editors, the reporters, they tend to live in Washington, D.C. and New York. Mm-hmm. They tend to be upper middle class or wealthy. They work for companies worth billions of dollars. So on TV, you have millionaires paid by billionaires to present information.
Yeah, let's throw up. I think we actually have an article that like outlines some of these, the net worth of some of the people that are bringing us our nightly news every day or daily news every day. And it's I looked this up with an inkling of kind of how dire it was going to be, but it's much more extreme than I thought. You have people like, so on the lower end, Jake Tapper earning like having a net worth of $4 million, Lester Holt $12 million, Megyn Kelly $15 million, Brian Williams $40 million.
There is some of that, but it's also who are you hanging out with? What are your social circles? Yeah. And look, we on this campaign, we spend our time, when I travel around the country with Bernie, which is a lot of what I do is travel a lot of places with Bernie, we spend our time talking to low-wage workers.
There was that great tweet that Faz had of him, where Faz was saying he was looking for Bernie, and he went upstairs to his room, and he found him in the room talking to the maid cleaning the room. It's actually one of the great myths about Bernie that I hear, and it's really interesting to see up close. Is you hear from people in D.C., Bernie's a curmudgeon. He doesn't like people. Here's the truth of that. He doesn't like political hacks. But real people, like when we see a worker who comes up to Bernie and talks about their life, he will engage that conversation if he can. Like, I have to pull him away because we have to go do something else. When, as Faz found out in that tweet, like he was talking to a maid about her life. When he is on the road and waiters and waitresses, the people who those kitchen people, staff. Kitchen staff, hotel staffs. It's why we go to low wage worker strikes, right? Walmart workers. Those people, that's who he wants to interact with. And those are the people he wants this campaign to represent. I've never seen him happier about anything on this campaign than the fact that our biggest donor base in terms of corporations was Walmart, and he was like, that's the workers standing up for this campaign, and he was so happy about that.
And to be clear about that, just to add an aspect of this is that even though there's a lot more diversity among media figures than there has been in the historical past, that diversity, racial diversity, ethnic diversity doesn't translate to economic diversity. So the lens that they offer on racial issues is often doesn't have that class aspect to it. So you will get a lot of attention to issues that relate to, a wealthy person being racially profiled, or, the Jussie Smollett case, or, these kind of instances where it could happen to any of us regardless of our class background, and not a lot of attention to the fact, for example, as you mentioned, these Walmart workers. Walmart is the largest single employer of African Americans in the country.
Now, mind you, this is an example. When we went to Walmart, we got a lot of media coverage because it wasn't about the workers, and that's what's interesting, and that's where we have a job to do on this campaign, is coming up with, and I'm gonna reveal what's behind the curtain.
Right.
Take some of these issues and create moments like that, because if not, how do we get attention to these issues?
MSNBC won't cover it, the New York Times
so
won't
how do
cover
we
it.
do it? You create, if you want a crowd, pick a fight sometimes.
Sure.
And our fight on this campaign, what the media wants is the candidates punching each other and duking it out. They love that. I remember before the debate, I forget who it was. MSNBC was on in the room I was in as the debate started. Bernie was already out on stage. I was backstage, and MSNBC was on, and somebody was like, "What I really want to see is Bernie and Joe Biden go duke it out." It's like, this isn't a boxing match. This isn't UFC. This isn't a football game. No, and where we are talking about on this campaign is Wall Street, the drug companies that employ low-wage workers. So we have to come up with ways to introduce that argument into the media. And look, it's hard. We have a higher bar because of that.
Yeah. Well, that's part of why we have the 99. Part of the idea behind this show is that we can have a space that isn't beholden to ad buys or whatever kind of corporate elites want to hear about. This can be a space that's largely defined by the issues in this campaign and what viewers like you care about. So please do comment and let us know what kind of things you would actually like us to cover here, and if there's a particular direction you would like to take this conversation we're having now in, and if there are particular instances of media bias that you found to be particularly remarkable this week that you want us to throw up on the screen and highlight right now, because we'd love to talk.
I'd like to thank Hashan for complimenting me on my books. Thank you for.
Well, we've got a good one. Spirit 2011 says that every single MSNBC poll has ignored Gen Xers and millennials. The CNN polls did too, right? There was this not applicable for people under 35.
Look, I would just say this. Polls, the coverage of polls is a problem. I spent a year doing polling at one point during my career. And just because I was, early in my career, I was working on Capitol Hill, and I was like, I want to go behind the curtain and see what goes on. The most behind the curtain thing was polling. I was like, I'll go get a job at a polling firm. And I literally went and got a job at a polling firm and spent a year doing polling. And the one thing I learned, and this was back in 2003, by the way, when people had landlines and still picked them up. And even then, the kind of horse race ballot stuff, everybody knew was problematic.
Right.
And that was, right now, here's the problem pollsters face. First off, I never pick up my phone for an unknown number.
Right.
Facts.
If you're trying to reach me and you don't have my number, just text me and tell me who you are, and I'll make a decision. Because 90% of the unknown numbers are spam calls. So I screen every call on my phone right now.
Right.
That's not which, by the way, if anybody needs to reach me, just text me.
Should we throw his number up on the Twitch screen?
Let's not do that.
Doc's Ari.
Okay. But the point is, I've been talking to pollsters in the media and having these conversations actually, and they're struggling because they don't know how to get their samples. So then you get into methodologies that are largely untested, a lot of online panels, and this creates a situation where if you look at polling being released on a single day, there are variances of 10, 12, 14 points in this polling. And what you learn is both of those are accurate technically within their samples, but how do you have a sample? Also, by the way, let's be clear. The question is who's going to vote in a primary. And right now, for anybody to try to predict the ratios of voter turnout is a bit of a fool's errand. The problem is every political reporter I shouldn't say every, let's not generalize. A lot of political reporters want to be sports reporters. Meaning, have you ever read an AP sports report? It's really simple. An AP sports report is The Knicks played the Nets. The Knicks scored 90 points. The Nets scored 80 points. Quote from Knicks player, quotes from Nets player, quote from something else.
Yeah.
Interesting color that happened in the game, concluding paragraph. Yeah. That's an AP Sports report. That's how they want to cover politics. Oh, I was with some reporters as we were traveling. You know, we did this trip in Iowa and Texas and Nevada over the weekend. Mm-hmm. And a reporter I was with, it was a good reporter, by the way, was talking about the NEA forum. They're like, who do you think put points on the board? That was the question the reporter asked me.
It's NEA, not NBA.
Yeah, NEA. I was like, I didn't know there were points. Like, I didn't know.
Yeah,
and
it's a game.
And polls are trying to create scores that right now don't exist. And reporters are like stunned when they're like, do you care about this poll? I'm like, I don't let, first off, and I hope everybody understands this out there, do not, my friends, do not let polling drive your mental state, and do not let, like, I see people doing that all the time, and it's just like, I've seen differentials in polls in the last week of 10 points.
Yeah. Well, this gets us, this is a good question, and this is from Kenneth, I think, on Facebook. And this gets to some of the media bias that we've seen even in the last week. He said, I love how Bernie Sanders is a solid number 2 in the polls, but all the news talks about first, third, and fourth place as if Bernie doesn't exist. Mia, can you pull up this headline we have here? Yeah, this is my favorite headline. This is Politico. Harris Warren tie for third place in the new 2020 Dem poll, but Biden still leads. Right. Who's in second place?
And they did 2 of those. They posted another version of that article again today.
After they got roasted.
Just ratioed up the wazoo. Exactly.
But here's the thing. This is what was that bias? In my mind, that bias there that clearly exists because that headline is insane.
It's intentional. There's no way that you can write that headline and not intentionally leave out the person who's in second place.
Well, see, I think it is intentional, but what drove that intentionality is, Bernie's in second place. That's not new. The hot story is Biden falling and these other 2 candidates rising. Yeah. That's the hot story. And look, I'm not saying it's less. Don't believe for 1 second I'm saying this is less insidious than it is.
Yeah.
Like, don't believe that for one second. This is insidious.
Yeah.
Right? But realize it's there. By the way, let me state this. Politico, and I would be totally remiss if I did not state this. Politico had a headline maybe 6 weeks ago, and a story 6 weeks ago, and a series of tweets 6 weeks ago. That was literally one of the most disgusting things I have seen in my political career.
Yeah, which one was this?
You
have a long memory for a disgusting tweet.
Yeah. This is the And what they did is they said the secret of Bernie Sanders millions. First off, there's no secret to Bernie Sanders bank accounts. Second, like they had him in front of a money tree.
Yeah, a literal money tree.
A literal money tree. Third, which first off, the whole look and feel was purely anti-Semitic.
Right.
The headline and the way it was written was anti-Semitic. And by the way, just so people understand one thing, the writer of the story does not write their own headlines, does not write their own tweets. So you can't blame the journalist, actually. The editors made a decision to do this. Then they had a graphic, which also the writer isn't responsible for. And the graphic had these 3 modern houses in it.
Yeah.
And let me tell you.
On his shoulders, then on his shoulders.
They were these 3 beautiful modern houses. I've seen Bernie Sanders houses. Those ain't Bernie Sanders. Those aren't the houses. Let me tell you that much. And that was disgusting media bias.
Yeah. This is the picture.
Yeah. There's another version where he's actually holding the houses.
Yeah.
But yeah.
By the way, I think there's a question. There's the picture.
Yeah.
Diva Dan, I think, has an interesting question on YouTube.
Yeah.
He's saying you should talk about how Bernie's grassroots funding is being somehow posed as worse than people like Buttigieg, despite the fact that Bernie has double the number of individual donors. Yeah, this is another way. Institutionally, reporters are like, money's what matters. To be honest, the difference, first off, Bernie has more cash on hand, I believe.
Yeah,
right.
Around $30 million.
Around $30 million, more cash on hand than any individual candidate in this race.
And has raised more money over the first 2 quarters of the race than any other candidate.
Which is the first step. But second, so they're looking. Look, why is Pete Buttigieg a story? Well, it gets back to it's new. It's, oh my God, Pete Buttigieg, a guy polling at about 5%, is raising an insane amount of money, doing what we have chosen not to do. Which and by the way, it's not even a choice. That's what's weird. It's I don't know. Bernie Sanders in a room of high dollar donors would be one of the funniest things I've ever seen in politics. Can't imagine. Cannot imagine what that would be like. By the way.
And part of what's so interesting there is that to the extent that there is a story about a person polling at 4%, raising $24 million, the story is, what does that mean about who is contributing to his campaign? If there are very few people who are on the ground supporting him, but he's able to raise that much money, that's a question that should generate some skepticism about who is invested in his messaging. In contrast, the fact that we have set records with respect to small donor funding and have an average donor who's given only $18, that should be a story in and of itself that is laudable.
To think about, like, so it's 2,800 is the limit, is the minimum. So we basically have to have just under 200 contributions for every one of those max outs.
Which is a good reminder that we need your help.
Smash that donate button. Smash it hard. If I'll wear a hat, I'll put on a hat if people.
Really?
Yes.
You will?
Yes.
All right, let's see the donations
if that
come
button
in.
Gets smashed.
What is the hat that you're gonna put on if we?
It's a selection. People should be able to vote.
Most recent donation is from Angelica G, and we got Dale, who also gave $27 just now. Donovan gave $250 from Donovan.
Donovan, give me. If I see two more donations of $250, this hat's going on.
All right.
This is how Bernie does high dollar fundraising.
We go on Twitch.
We go on Twitch and offer for $250. I'll humiliate myself.
So while we're on the subject, I also want to, relatedly to this kind of fundraising issue, is, like, I think rightly so, Sanders and both Warren and Sanders have gotten some positive press for the small dollar donations. The problem is that there has been some characterization of when the Warren campaign achieves something, everything is characterized as though it's like oppositional between our campaign and hers.
And it's not. And it's very strange that because they want to fight, and reporters just don't believe it. By the way, have we hit my threshold yet?
No, not yet.
You guys.
Guys, come on. They want an oppositional fight, but that's not who Bernie Sanders is.
Right.
Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have known each other for decades.
Right.
There are differences between them, and those differences will get discussed on the campaign.
Right.
But that's not a slugfest. Like, let's remember, like, and by the way, there's also this thing in the media about wanting the Republican 2016 primary, where presidential candidates were measuring the size of certain body parts on national television. I mean,
let's hope that we stay away from that.
There's no way we're going to get that in the Democratic primary.
Yeah. The article that I'm thinking of is called, it's titled, Elizabeth Warren takes a bite out of Bernie Bros. We're going to do two stereotypes, two smears in one.
Anthony John Maloof has put us over the top. Here we go. There we go. How do I look?
You look good.
Who
made that hat?
What?
Who made that?
I don't know. It was on the shelf behind.
Right.
Whoever made it, good job.
This piece that Elizabeth Warren takes a bite out of Bernie Bros with $19 million haul in campaign cash, and that kind of framing is completely not necessary.
It's not true. It's you know what this is proving? This is proving that the Bernie Sanders model in 2016 of looking to small donors, of basing your entire campaign around small donors, of it works and can work for candidates that do it and do it properly, and that our party doesn't need people who can write $2,800 checks. And certainly doesn't need the people who can write the $100,000 checks or the $1 million checks.
Salty Doggy says you look like Daddy Bear.
What is Daddy Bear?
What is Daddy Bear?
I don't know.
Salty, can you tell us what Daddy Bear is? Unless it's not appropriate.
I think I know what it means. Maybe that's a compliment.
It might be. I think we should just assume it's a compliment.
I'm ready to let it go. If I can pick up on a little bit, the part of that tweet that was about this Bernie Bro mythology, anybody who follows me on Twitter has read my past writing.
By the way, you can follow me on Twitter at Ari Rabenhoff. I need like 400 more followers to top 20,000.
You should be able to throw that up on the screen underneath on our talking heads. But Another thing that happens as a recurring theme is this idea that Bernie is flagging with support from black voters. And poll after poll shows that's not the truth. I don't have the most recent in front of me, but we all saw, hopefully, that Intercept article from earlier this year that showed that Bernie Sanders, at the time, was number 1 with black voters. I think he's now number 2, just after Biden.
No,
sure.
This is a point of media bias. I feel like a lot of people in the media can't get over 2016 narratives.
Yes.
Correct.
Like they're jammed into these narrative boxes where, and I was in the media in 2016. I hosted a radio show on Sirius XM for that campaign. I interviewed Bernie. Never interviewed Hillary. Did get an interview with Tim Kaine when he was nominated VP. Never had Hillary on the show. I wonder why.
Sorry.
But the point I'm making is reporters can't see. There are a bunch of reporters and certain people out there in Twitter world who can't seem to leave the context of a 2016 campaign.
Yeah.
And therefore they take narratives that existed then that are just not true right now.
Yeah.
And data bears out them not being true.
Yeah.
And they just have to, like, they can't leave that same moment, that same thing. And also, by the way, can I just make one more point about polling I didn't make?
Sure.
Just one thing for people to realize. Polling, horse race polling, is a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator. When you're seeing a result in a poll, you're seeing kind of at best, if the poll is accurate, in a very fluid race, where most voters, by the way, are not paying attention at all.
Right.
I mean, that's what's so crazy right now. I have opinions on this. All got started too early with everything, but basically because of the media pushing for it. But we'll put that to the side. But people aren't paying attention yet. These polling will shift. I guarantee. If you want to know how polling will work out for this campaign, and I'm somebody who reads a lot, who's seen a lot, I think this race is going to become very comparable to the 2012 Republican primary in terms of polling. And if you look at that primary, there was candidates, and candidates would surge and then fall, and surge and then fall. And Newt Gingrich popped up to, people forget Newt Gingrich was twice in 2012 the number 1 polling candidate in the Republican Party. I think, was that Herman Cain's year?
I don't know.
2012. Yes,
that was Herman Cain.
That was Herman Cain's year.
Yeah.
He 999. That was my favorite.
This sort of show is named after, actually.
I pray not. If it is, I'm walking off the set. And it shows polls are totally a fluid indicator.
Yeah.
But they're easy that's the other bias I think we talk about. Look, the reporting industry, it's terrible right now, right? When I traveled in 2004 during the general election with the campaign, with John Kerry's campaign in 2004, and back then there were reporters for the magazines who would go out on the road and have to file once a week stories. There were photographers who were shooting on Leica cameras on film, who would leave the road to develop their film to get the cover shots for the magazines. Yeah. Now, first off, reporters are filing. They have to tweet. They have to file 3 or 4 stories a day who are traveling. Photographers are filing every 5 minutes with photos. And so reporters are looking for fast, simple narratives because they have to do it. And polling provides an easy way. Oh, this person's up, this person's down. It's a bias towards easy because, look, in a lot of cases, these are people who are just trying to do their jobs.
Yeah.
So before we get too far away from the point I was trying to make about black Bernie bro bias, I want to pull up this article from The Root, which did this interesting analysis of asking which campaign is getting the most donations from zip codes where at least half of the people are people of color. And they do the same thing that the Political article did, which was skip over Bernie, who comes in at number 3. In the article, there is no mention of Bernie at number 3. For what purpose? I don't know. You tell me. But it does a very convenient job of pushing that narrative when the reality is, if you can pull up this second clip here, the truth is that Bernie Sanders voters are 7% less likely to be white than the average Democrat. Mind's blown, I know. But this is the inconvenient truth of the diversity of this movement, which is completely what you would expect of a grassroots working class movement of the likes of which we have here today. Should we take some of these questions? I saw a question earlier where someone commented beautiful. Who was that? And I assume that was a comment about exactly Ari. So thank you.
This is a good one. This is actually a good one from Prime Aquatic Iguana. Whenever I see terrible opinion piece or hot take, I send Bernie $5. It feels real good.
God, you must. I don't understand how you haven't maxed out. Really, like there are like 93 of those a day. So by my calculations, hold on. Let me borrow Brianna's
So Prime
phone.
Aquatic One, for your information, you can only donate $2,800.
Yeah, Prime Aquatic One has donated $10 million to Bernie Sanders' campaign. Thank you for your support.
It's a violation.
This is a good question from Elizabeth.
Yeah.
How do we get people to trust their peers, other working class people like me, rather than mainstream media hosts?
Well, I think people do trust their peers, and I think that's something that is important. And by the way, something that Bernie Sanders has done uniquely that is one of the things I'm most proud of on this campaign. And something, Josh and I worked in the Senate office before this campaign started, and something we focused on there, which is letting working class people, letting real people tell their own, using our media platforms to let them tell their own stories. And it's something reporters are always shocked. Me, like, I watched a video on Bernie Sanders' Facebook page, and he wasn't in the video. And it's like, no, that's not what's important. What's important for our campaign is to give working class people of all races, of all colors, of all everything, a platform to tell their own stories.
Absolutely. And let me make another pitch, which is the Burn app, and our entire organizing structure is built around friends, you talking to your friends. That it's more effective for you to tell your friend about Bernie Sanders than
Josh,
for us to send an ad.
Peer-to-peer persuasion.
How do I get the Burn app?
Well, you can go online.
I can.
Yes. Do you have the internet?
Sometimes. I try to avoid it, frankly.
I believe that is it app.berniesanders.com, is that right? I'm embarrassed that that is right. It's app.berniesanders.com.
Yes.
Just go there, pull it up. Welcome to Burn, the Bernie Sanders app. Create an account.
So we have two things you should do. Get app.berniesanders.com. Also follow me on Twitter at Ari Ravenhoff.
Oh my God.
And 3, smash that donate button.
Yes.
All good points. Do we do another question, or do
let's do another question.
Biases? Okay. So, someone asked a question about the local news. David Grossman on Facebook says local news is crucial to stopping national media bias, but jobs are in free fall. Does Bernie have a plan to help local journalists? And we were talking about this a little bit earlier when we were sidelining about this, that we actually get much more favorable local news coverage than we do national news coverage.
It's something we noticed in 2017, 2018, and continues, is when we travel to a place, the local media actually covers what we say, talks to real people. They're not looking for like a hot take or the quick thing to get the Twitter bump. Yeah. And look, the decline of local media is a really complex problem, and we should come up with a plan for that. I don't know what it is, and I think there has to be a conversation about that. But there are cities in this country. I was reading, I want to say, was it Youngstown, where the Vindicator shut down recently?
Yeah.
Which was one of the great local newspapers in America. At one point had huge political coverage in Ohio.
And today, the Chicago Defender, which is one of the great black newspapers in Chicago, covered, actually Bernie has a connection to them because they covered the Willis wagons and the fight against school segregation when he was in Chicago in the 60s, just shut down too.
And you have to remember what has caused this. There have been multiple things, and from a policy perspective, it makes life difficult. Thing number one that caused it is a lot of local media for decades was subsidized in America. Now, you're saying, how was it subsidized? Really simply, you had to put legal notices so you have to put court notices and legal notices publicly, which meant there was a full page of basically ads in a paper every day that was the courtroom and legal lawyer. Like, Brianna, you're a lawyer, you know this better than I do. But
thanks for reminding me.
But you have to put notices, public notices, so they'd use there'd be a legal notices section of the paper. That's gone because people can just put them online. There was a classified ad section of the paper, and that's where papers made huge amounts of money because that was the highest per page advertising rates in the paper. And there were just pages of help wanted, car for sale, job. Like when 20 years ago, I I remember watching movies. Whenever they had like the dad needed to find the job in the movie, they'd open up the paper and be circling wanted ads. That doesn't exist anymore. So that's changed.
Yeah.
And that's taken, and for local media, like the one newspaper that didn't have any of that, if you know, is the Wall Street Journal. Never had classifieds. Most other papers did. The second thing is, frankly, letting two monopolistic companies, Google and Facebook, literally control the advertising market, means these papers are fully reliant on these two companies for ever declining ad revenue per click.
Yeah.
And has created a situation where, it is impossible. It's impossible to make money that way. And what you need is like, the problem is now for a local newspaper to survive in a lot of cases is you need the venerable and friendly city millionaire to be subsidizing their local paper. And that creates problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
And look, it's an international problem, right? Sheldon Adelson owns the Las Vegas Journal-Review. Sheldon Adelson also owns the most widely distributed newspaper that is distributed for free in Israel.
Yeah.
And Sheldon Adelson's politics across the board, he's probably, like, at least with the Koch brothers, we agree on like criminal justice reform.
Yep. Ending forever wars.
Ending foreign wars. At least there's like,
yeah.
So with Sheldon Adelson's politics are the worst.
They're truly terrible.
Yeah. Truly terrible.
We talked a little bit about this before, but Yasmin says, should there be a strategy in place for Bernie to play into the media's biases?
Yeah, we have. I mean, that's something we are thinking about every day.
Yeah.
How do we, and to preview something, I think we try to come up with ways to participate in the fight. We'll have an interesting, soon we'll be announcing?
So very soon. This week, I think.
Very soon. Not going to tell you what it is.
You'll have to come back on Thursday.
Unless somebody totally smashes the
Come back on Thursday at 6 p.m. and we'll talk about it.
Unless I see like a complete like smash of the donut button, I'll just let it out.
Yeah.
Then you're gonna announce.
I'll just
but
announce.
to that point, I mean, there is a reason why we're here. There's a reason why we have this Twitch stream. There's a reason why Bernie Sanders has a broader social media outreach than any other campaign. There's a reason why we have the campaign podcast Hear the Burn, which you Twitch watchers should keep in mind. Today's episode, which was released this morning, is actually all about Twitch and social media outreach. And we talked to Hassan Piker, who is a big Twitch guy, and also Jim Sterling, who's a huge YouTube star, both of whom do a lot of left-oriented outreach and are trying to fight this fight, which is a really significant battle happening on social media where the right has really dominated when it comes to content. So check that out, respond, and let us know how you feel about that as well.
I really do want to play Excite Bike on Twitch.
I offered last time to race people and play type racer and see who has like the fastest words per minute, but apparently that's not what the kids want these days.
That seems boring. The kids want the kids want Excite Bike.
Smash that button if you want to play Ari and Excite Bike.
Can we touch on?
You don't even have to. Just call me.
Can we touch on Judy Tiva 1's question? Says talk about the climate change emergency and next steps. This is something that Bernie Sanders did today. Yeah. He with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Representative Earl Blumenauer, introduced in Congress a resolution to declare a climate emergency. Yesterday, Donald Trump did pretty much the exact opposite. He talked about his environmental record, of which there's not much to talk about. Let's talk about
the media here, because in my book Lies Incorporated, which is not up on the shelf, shame. I talk about the story of a lot of the story of climate bias, media bias in this country, and I point out that some of the same scientists, and this is Naomi Oreskes at Harvard has actually done ample research on this, so let me give a shout out to Professor Oreskes at Harvard, showing that the same scientists that the tobacco industry used to deny tobacco smoke caused cancer were some of the same scientists that were quoted in the media denying climate change. And the media was complicit for years in this he said, she said coverage of climate change. Yeah. And it's embarrassing, but look, the part of the reason we are in some of this climate crisis right now is because the media, especially, by the way, between the years 2007 and 2016. That 10-year period was particularly bad because coming into 2007 in 06, in like 06, 07, there was like Newt Gingrich and Nancy Pelosi sitting on a couch doing an ad about how we had to solve climate change.
Mm-hmm.
And the right kind of, it then partisanized the issue. And then suddenly it became a he said, she said. Oh, Republicans say, Democrats say. Yeah. And the truth is, a lot of bias in the media, you go through a lot of stories. The goal of the fossil fuel industry, by the way, and same strategy as the tobacco industry. And if you read my book, Lies Incorporated, they're actually the memos in the book. And by the way, if you're like a real dork like me, you can read all the tobacco industry's memos are online to each other. There are hundreds of thousands of them. Read them. They are fascinating. You can go back through, because in the lawsuit they had to put up all their internal memorandum from the 50s forward. They are fascinating. And their goal was not to convince a majority of the public that tobacco didn't cause cancer.
Right.
That was never their goal. Their goal was to muddy the water just enough to cast enough doubt that the media would have to say both sides.
Both sides, plausible deniability.
Great journalists, people who were revered as great journalists, were caught up in this. Edward R. Murrow in one of the memos. They go through in one of the memos how they manipulated Edward R. Murrow into covering this.
I want to pull out two things that are related to this. First is the ideological tilt of signature panels on Sunday shows. This is a really striking graph in terms of the media bias.
And this is, I have to say, this type of counting study has been really revealing about Sunday shows.
You did this a lot at Media Matters.
We did it a lot when I was at Media Matters, and it's one of those things in terms of, first off, racial and sex bias on these panels. Insane. And also, they were insane. They still are
Meaning
insane.
that they didn't have a lot of representation.
Like 10 years ago, 10 years ago when we would count, it was like 100% white men.
Right.
On these panels, which is problematic for obvious reasons. Like, it is obviously problematic. But the ideological tilt, and part of the problem is that progressives and leftists are not a part of DC infrastructure in the same way. I once said to a colleague in DC, the problem with this city is if you don't sell out by the time you're 45, you're considered a loser. And the person goes, but I'm 44. And I go, one more year. But the point is, like, they have on these consultants and lobbyists. And he never, so they'll be like, here's Democratic strategist, blah, blah, blah. And then you find out, I remember once when I was at Media Matters, one of the angriest phone calls I ever got was there was a Democratic strategist on a panel. And the Democratic strategist was touting drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And we pointed out, there was an innocuous Media Matters post that said, X network had X person on, and they did not disclose that they received money from. How dare you suggest that I take this position because I receive money? And it's like, I'm actually not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is it just should be disclosed.
Right. Yeah. Well, the New York Times did this recently too, right? In stories about Bernie, they have used Democratic consultants and lobbyists, and they do not disclose who they are, who they're connected to.
People who've worked for
and financial interests. And the problem is a lot of those people in DC are just because of the toxicity
That's who reporters talk to. That is part of this establishment.
Well, there are people that I term rent-a-quotes. And you see this. Let me give you a tip on reading the media here. If you see somebody who has nothing to do with anything quoted all the time, they'll be like, here's a story on, and this happens in stories about everybody. They'll be like, and then X person, you're like, that name's familiar. I've seen them quoted in 17 stories today about 16 different topics. It's because there are people the media knows will just give them a prefabricated quote on anything.
Well, it used to be Donald Trump. I read this article about how many times Donald Trump appeared in the New York Times in like the 1970s and 80s. And the reason was he was just the guy that they could reach out and give a quote to.
There are people, there are literal people who now have television shows on networks. And the reason they got their start at the network was because they parked themselves in the network, like literally outside the network, and made sure they were available at any moment to go on TV. And there are people who that's their life.
Yes.
But the problem is those people do not have our ideology, do not have our politics. They're not people on picket lines.
Of course.
They're not people fighting for Medicare for all.
Yeah.
They're not people who do that tend not to have a lot of student loans because the truth is, a lot of those people, or especially early in their careers, are remunerated by publicity and not by money, which means they have to have another source.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Money.
Only rich people can go into. Look, I was stuck in this trap. Only wealthy people can go into journalism.
That's not totally true. There are journalists.
There are people who are struggling. I had
yes.
a long chat with a young left journalist the other day who is just graduating from law school and asking me whether or not he should even bother taking the bar because he's wrestling between, am I going to make enough money to pay off these loans, or should I actually pursue this career, which is really up and coming and doing very well?
The person made a critical mistake.
Okay, so wait. So
they went to law school.
Right. But I want to fix it to this point because this is something that has come up again and again in this question of the student debt cancellation business, and this idea that wealthy people are going to be helped by this because wealthy people have all the student loan debt. Wealthy people aren't taking out loans at an 8% interest rate for funsies just because. There is a group of people like myself who come from, working class, middle class backgrounds who society says go to law school to be successful, go to law school to attain the
professional to be
American dream.
successful.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to get a professional degree, and then what they don't tell you is the other side of the story is that you're going to be burdened with this debt that you are less able to pay off than your peers. The average Black American, 12 years after graduation, has more debt than they had on the moment that they came out. And there's a reason. There are structural, institutional reasons for that. And the reality is a lot of people who are earning high wages and who do have a lot of student debt earn those high wages because they feel compelled to stay at those kinds of jobs in order to keep up with their $2,300 a month loan payments. And we would have more doctors working in low-income communities. We would have more public interest lawyers and the like. We would have more people being journalists. Exactly. If we didn't have these financial
There's
constraints.
an interesting question from T. Campbell Murphy on Twitter. Sorry, I'm looking away from the camera towards the monitor, so it looks really awkward on TV. Is the left major media also at fault for the lack of progressives' real coverage? Here's the thing. I think there are very few actual left major media. Like MSNBC is considered the left. And look, let's not even get into fights about like certain hosts, but Joe Scarborough was a Republican congressman. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm glad. He's just not left. Nicole Wallace was the spokesperson for the Bush administration.
Yeah.
Like, she might hate George Bush. She is a perfectly nice person. I'm not making any comment. I can comment on her other thing, but
let's not get into specific hosts. He says.
But my point is, she's a Republican host. Like it's a left. If that was left media,
right? Even the quote unquote left media is not really
is chock full of Republican hosts.
Yes.
It's not like a personal value judgment about them. They're Republicans.
No question.
That's simple. And look, I think there are left alternative outlets. The Young Turks is out there, and I've actually been pleasantly surprised how wide they've gotten, and it's credit to
growing.
them. And look, there are people like Tom Hartman who have wide audiences. There are left media, but the problem there's Amy Goodman who's been at it. What are we laughing at?
You got a question from Sheila Squalice, I don't know, on Facebook.
Oh my God.
Hi, Ari.
I think we lived across. No, I went to school.
Wait,
with
you gotta
She says, hi, Ari. Haven't seen you since the first grade. Looking good. Very proud of what you're doing these days.
Hi, Miss Squillis. I think she was the mother of a guy I went to school with in elementary school.
Oh, that's great.
It's
a community. It's a real family here.
Smash that donate button.
So you guys, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Can I bring this all the way back? I just want to ask one question. Actually, Huckabee on Twitch says...
Really, Mike Huckabee's interfering in our...
I don't know if it's Mike Huckabee.
Hi, Mike.
Maybe Sarah.
Sarah Huckabee Sanders?
Says this, and I think it's a good question. You guys don't need to tell us that the system is corrupt / biased against Bernie. 90% of us are already voting for Bernie. You need to use the platform to mobilize and help us argue on behalf of Bernie with more casual people. So let me ask you this.
We need to do both.
I don't know.
Well, let me just ask. Let's take that comment and let me ask you this. We've talked a lot about how the media misses, the stories and the issues that affect people the most. We've talked about how that can sort of translate into bias against Bernie and other left-wing candidates and left-wing issues and movements. How can people use that information to as they read stories, as they consume media? How can they use it to talk to their friends about what they're reading in the media or seeing on TV? What are the big takeaways that people, what are the things that people can take away from this conversation to actually go out and that now inform their friends and their family?
Well, I would push back against this a little bit because I do think that there is a lot of value in correcting the record. I was at a social gathering this past weekend with a bunch of people I just met, friends of friends, and we ended up in a political discussion about student debt cancellation.
Seems terrible. Why would you do that on your weekend?
Obviously, I love to engage with people about politics, or I wouldn't have happily leaped into this job and into journalism. But we had this very animated back and forth about who benefits from student debt cancellation, and it was remarkable the number of myths that were thrown back at me about Bernie Sanders in particular. Yeah. And one of them that kept coming up again and again was this idea that Bernie Sanders didn't do enough in 2016 to help Hillary after he dropped out of the election.
Worst.
I know, but I was able to disarm it by pulling up some actual facts about how many events Bernie Sanders did versus how many events Hillary Clinton did herself, and how hard he campaigned, and some neutral sources, which at the time contemporaneously reported on how hard Bernie was working on the ground, and that really did shift this woman's opinion and open up the door for us to have a more substantive conversation about the issue at hand currently. So I do think that there are some big ticket mythologies that are worth combating, and I want to do some of that here. Yeah. But I also take your point that there's sometimes the best defense is a good offense, and talking affirmatively about what Bernie is doing now and how he benefits working class people and bringing working class people into this conversation as the face of it makes it a lot more difficult to kind of dismiss Bernie Sanders as like an old white man or who somehow isn't representative of the quote unquote real America.
What do you think, Ari? As the media expert, how should people read the news? What should they tell their friends about the biases that we've been talking about today?
Look, I think what I would suggest, and there was a book a few years back where drew an analogy that I really liked, where they talked about information as like food consumption, and they said, we know as people that we can't eat pizza for dinner every night. If we had pizza's delicious. I'd love a good slice of pizza right now.
Facts.
True fact. Pizza is delicious. If you disagree,
smash that donate button.
If you disagree, I don't even want you as a part of this campaign. Pizza's delicious.
Bold.
True fact. There's just no disagreement. It smells great. You want to eat that pizza, right? You are actually genetically programmed because you genetically know it's like got a high fat content, like you want to eat that pizza. But if you ate pizza every night, you would get very sick. So you need to eat broccoli. And very few people are like, you know what I really want tonight for dinner? Broccoli. Right? Some people are.
Roasted cauliflower, perhaps.
I assume some people are gonna be like, I'm gonna get the hate. They're gonna be like, you're hating on broccoli and Brussels sprouts. I am. They're good, but nobody's like, craving it. But you need broccoli. You need
Where were we on this?
I'm getting there. Give me a second. The beauty of having our media is I can take time to. But you need to balance pizza and broccoli. I think the problem in our media diet right now is everything is pizza. Everything you read is comfortable, and that's, by the way, part of it. What you read in the media, what you watch, and what you consume, if it's not making you somewhat uncomfortable, if it's not challenging your ideology, if you're just getting fed stuff that reinforces biases, it siloizes ourselves and makes our discourse worse. So first off, on media consumption, the thing people can do more than anything else is vary their media sources. Like, look, read some things that challenge you, and challenge it back. Right? Yeah. And second, like, the most valuable asset Bernie Sanders has is not any of us. Look, we're employed by the campaign. We are clearly biased here on the 99.
Yes. We'll admit that.
We openly acknowledge our bias. Your friends, your families, your coworkers, you are a source of information. So having that information, knowing the facts, knowing the details, knowing how to debunk those myths is something that you can do for the campaign that we can't do for ourselves. Now, we have to arm you with that stuff, and we have a lot of resources to do that. But we need you to help spread our message. Because look, the one thing is, think about it this way. If we have Bernie likes to talk about the over 1 million volunteers on this campaign. if each of those 1 million people convince 15 of their friends to vote for Bernie in the primary, this thing's a landslide.
Yeah.
It's what was that?
Just a screenshot.
Yeah.
Continue on.
This thing is a landslide.
And
you are the best. Like Bernie is first off the best spokesperson for Bernie.
Yeah.
Which is what I love. There's a certain reporter who I'm thinking of right now, who loves to. I'm not gonna say a name.
last time you said that, you went and named a bunch of names.
Not gonna name a name here because I'm gonna
bated
call
breath.
somebody out specifically.
Okay.
Who loves to call me and he's like, why did you advise Bernie to do this? And it was like, I didn't. Bernie decided to do. That was Bernie's idea, and we executed it. Come on, you're his guy. You're his guy. He likes to scream that at me on the phone. You're his guy. And the point is, yeah, Bernie is the best outlet for Bernie. He's not a standard politician,
right?
And that's part of it. And media hacks and media spokespeople are never going to be our best army. We're never going to win those people. But you are the people who can actually bring this campaign home. You, by talking to your friends, your neighbors, your family, being armed at the water cooler, being armed at the Thanksgiving table, being armed when people come at you and say, hey, I heard Bernie Sanders wants to make our country blah, 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 blah. You have the weapons. Hey, I hear, I don't like Bernie because he didn't campaign for Hillary. Well, here are the facts about that. Yeah. He did 39 rallies. In the last week of the campaign, he visited 12 states for her. Here's all the appearances he did. Here's everything he did. You are our best because, first off, you're more trusted than us. Because I don't know your friends, family, and neighbors. I mean, clearly some of you I do. Clearly some of you I do. But I don't know them, but they know you and they trust you. It's like if you need a recommendation for a plumber, you don't go to strangers. And I don't know about you, but Yelp has steered me the wrong way too many times. If I need recommendations about by watching this, you are probably one of the more informed people among your friends. You're probably someone they look to.
Yeah.
So use that power.
To that end, Invincible Queer says, we need a pizza to believe in. And I think that's like a really, really good way to button up this messaging. We do have a couple more questions. How do you guys feel about getting to them?
I think maybe one more and we wrap it up.
Okay.
Yes.
I like this one from Just Jordan.
Just Jordan.
Which is the question, how will Bernie get Americans to become class conscious? How will Bernie get white Americans to reject white supremacist ideology? So the first half of that is actually more interesting to me because I do think part of one of the media biases that bothers me the most, and once you see it, you can't unsee it, is the extent to which class is completely removed from any of the analysis that happens on mainstream television and the mainstream written media as well. And it becomes clear when you notice its absence why there's this kind of a circularity to the conversations we have about what's going on in America. It never progresses because there is no discussion of coalition building about what can actually unite people across racial lines and other kinds of things that balkanize us. There's all this conversation over and over and over again about the fact that America is a racist country. America is a white supremacist country. America does have these legitimate divisions. But even very beautifully written and compelling pieces like Ta-Nehisi The Case for Reparations or his piece about Donald Trump being the first white president, they tend not to come to a resolution because at the end of the day, they diagnose the problem, America's racist, without really offering any solution. And from my perspective, I have a lot of optimism when it comes to politics because I see the solution as being rooted in a working class, class-based economic solidarity across groups, the very same kind of solidarity that racism was invented in advance to try to break up. And we see this over the history of this country and coalition building, that racism is used as a tool to divide up the exact kind of coalition, the rainbow coalition that people like Jesse Jackson and Bernie Sanders are trying to form. So I agree that the project of getting Americans to become more class conscious is an extremely important one. And at least from our end, I think part of that project is getting as many people who represent the class interests that aren't represented on the mainstream media in front of our cameras, on our podcasts, going to their rallies and elevating their voices and their interests as much as possible. To that end, this Thursday, We're going to a hospital closure, and you should tune in to both this thread and our Facebook live streams to see us supporting of that rally in Philadelphia. But that's an ongoing project, and when we say this campaign is really not me, us, that's what we mean, and that's what our agenda is.
What does Fortnite with Ninja mean?
Oh God, you can't ask that question on Twitch, Ari.
I'm
All right, on that terrible
Somebody
note,
wants to know when will Bernie play Fortnite with Ninja. I don't know what that
you're
means.
asking what Fortnite is.
I know what
we're on
Fortnite
Twitch.
is. I don't know what. I know.
Ninja is one of the biggest streamers on Twitch. He's yeah.
I'm terrible.
You can't be asking these questions
I
right
know
now.
Super
Save
Mario
them
Brothers
for when
3.
we're off the air. All right.
Listen to today's podcast, and you'll know more about what's happening on Twitch.
Just want to say thank you all for watching. We will be back. We're going to be streaming regularly on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time.
Will I be welcome back?
All right, we'll think about it. You went off on a bad note, so. But thank you all for watching. Really appreciate it. We'll see you again on Thursday. This has been the 99. Brianna, Ari, thanks again. We'll see you Thursday.
Bye.